I believe it was Heinz Kohut who coined the phrase narcissistic rage in the 1970s. Narcissistic rage is not the same as anger. There are four distinguishing features. Number one, it is sudden, abrupt. There are no warning signs. There are no antecedent behaviors. It just erupts out of nowhere. The transition is shocking. The narcissist, 1 minute, is all sunshine, and the next, an axe-wielding serial killer. Abruptness. Number two, disproportionality. It seems that what had triggered the narcissistic rage has very little to do with the rage itself. The rage is explosive, overwhelming, shocking, all-pervasive, directed at everyone, non-discriminatory. That's the second distinguishing feature. A third distinguishing feature. While anger is usually driven by external events, it is in this sense reactive. Narcissistic rage is endogenous. It reflects internal dynamics. Yes, ostensibly there is some kind of trigger. You said the wrong thing. You behaved the wrong way. You did not conform to the narcissist's expectations and fantasies. It's all true, but that's only a trigger. It's only an excuse. The narcissist's rage reflects his inner turmoil and tumult and chaos. None of this applies to run-of-the-mill rage. Today, I would like to discuss the recent discoveries in neuroscience and psychology as they pertain to rage versus anger. Stay with me. Don't get angry. Don't get rageful. Stay open-minded and listen. My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and I am a professor of psychology. So there's this new book out. It's written by the neurobiologist Doug Field, and the book is titled Why We Snap, Understanding the Rage Circuit in Your Brain. It's a fascinating book. Fields explores rapid responses, abrupt shifts in behavior and underlying moods, affects, neurochemistry, and neurobiology. These moments of rage, of loss of control, of escalation, often followed by regret, shame, and remorse, these moments could reach the point of physical violence and a threat to one's well-being and even existence. Why this maladaptive behavior? Rage doesn't seem to fulfill any meaningful function. Why did evolution allow it to emerge? And how does the narcissist fit in? Narcissists, of course, engage in a behavior typical to narcissists, known as narcissistic rage, as I've mentioned. But narcissists can also be angry. Not every explosive conduct is narcissistic rage. Narcissists can be legitimately angry or not legitimately angry, and the anger does not escalate to rage. What is the escalation trigger? What differentiates between anger that never escalates and rage that has little to do with anger? According to Doug Field, we all have a rage circuit, and none of us is able to control this circuit. This circuit is out of control. Douglas Field says that violent behavior occurs when our evolutionary triggers react in moments when rapid responses are needed. Clash is perceived as self-protective and self-preserving. To put it in plain English, rage seems to be a form of self-defense. And since our modern civilization is replete with stressful situations, anxiety-inducing anxiogenic situations, and frankly, very menacing or threatening circumstances. The prevalence and the incidence of rage are increasing. And so it would behoove all of us to study rage and anger much more deeply, because it is becoming much more widespread and a main motivational force. We see in politics, for example, that anger dictates election results. Anger is an ethos, a narrative, a kind of social mores. Anger is an organizing principle and also explanatory principle. It imbues our lives with meaning and sense. It's hermeneutic, and it drives us forward. It motivates us. And yet, as I said, there is a major difference between the abrupt manifestations of anger, known as rage, and anger itself. In the aforementioned book, Why We Snap, Fields outlines a number of ordinary situations that occur in everyone's everyday life that suddenly result in abrupt confrontations, filled with rage and danger to everyone involved. These bouts of rage. And the rage is not only reserved for people with anger issues. It's not like if you rage, you need anger management classes. That's a myth. It's not true. Even totally tranquil and calm and composed people rage from time to time. Fields notes that if circumstances are right, just about anyone can find themselves in rage-filled situations, and situations that involve this kind of escalatory, violent behavior. Ordinary people are violent from time to time. They engage in violence. And this is precisely what inspired Doug Fields' book. Fields argues that the daily news cycle features acts of violence by ordinary people who suddenly snap without having had any history of prior violent acts or propensity for anger. And so he decided to look into the brain. He decided to engage neuroscience in an attempt to understand what's driving us all, the neurocircuitry. The rage response seems to be baked into, hardwired to the wetware, to this brain that we all possess. There's a circuit or circuits that regulate rage. And possibly there's a strong hereditary component, although we know very little about this. This circuitry that controls these responses and behaviors ought to be, according to Fields, unconscious, subcortical, instantaneous. What Fields is trying to say, in less politically correct language, is that rage is a primitive reaction. It's a reptile reaction. It's something that harks back to our primordial atavistic state at the very inception of our species. Fields identifies 9 triggers, 9 common situations, circumstances, interactions that bring on, more frequently than not, bouts of rage. And these 9 situations are easily recognizable within ourselves and in the environment, and there's a way to control these situations and to diffuse these triggers. And so it leads to kind of therapeutic or self-therapeutic intervention. Throughout this, I want you to remember the narcissist. The narcissist lives inside his mind, in a world all his own. He's solipsistic. The narcissist is hypervigilant. He scans other people or the environment for insults, for slights, for potential attacks, for criticism, for disagreement. And then he magnifies and amplifies and inflates these alleged or ostensible threats, and he reacts as if his life is at stake. or at the very least, his inner balance, his sanity. So narcissists are hypersensitive in this sense. One could even say that they engage on a regular basis paranoid ideation, assuming the worst about people and their motivations. People are malevolent. And so the rage circuitry, if it does exist in the brain, the rage circuitry of narcissists is hyperactive, overactive. That may be one of the major differences between narcissists and normal or healthy people. Their ability to engage in controlled anger, anger that is essentially a form of communication, anger that is intended to modify elements in the environment or the behavior of other people, anger that is just a kind of language. When we are angry, we are telling other people, we don't feel good, we're uncomfortable, please change your behavior. The narcissist is unable to engage in this kind of communication because he cannot perceive the separateness and externality and personal autonomy and agency of other people. As far as he's concerned, other people don't exist. They're merely internal objects. And when they aggravate him, when they provoke him, when they challenge him, it's as if it's coming from the inside. An intolerable, terrifying sensation. And the narcissist reacts with panic. This panic translates into narcissistic rage. Fields identified 9 triggers. All of them exist with the narcissist. The only difference is they don't bring on anger. They invariably and ineluctably generate rage. Narcissist tends to exaggerate everything. It's a dramatic personality disorder. And so what he does, he engages in behaviors that are disproportionate. And so whatever the stimulus is, positive or negative, the narcissist reacts in a way that breaks the connection between trigger and reactivity or reactance. So, for example, when the narcissist receives narcissistic supply, he experiences euphoria and narcissistic elation, which is a disproportionate reaction. When the narcissist is challenged, he reacts with rage or terror or extreme shame. Everything is exaggerated. Narcissistic rage is a borderline feature of narcissism because it's a form of emotional dysregulation. The emotions underlying narcissistic rage overwhelm the narcissist. Fields refers to these 9 triggers using a mnemonic, life morts. Life morts, L-I-F-E-M-O-R-T-S. Life or death, insult, family, environment, mate, order in society, resources, tribe, and stopped. Each of these triggers is a threat detection response. So let's review them one by one. Life or death. These are situations in which people defend themselves when they perceive a danger that is, as implied by the name, life-threatening. Then you have insult. It's a situation in which some kind of slight, some kind of mockery or contempt, some sort of provocative act, some kind of disrespect takes place. And then this easily elicits rage. Family. It's a situation in which a family member is facing some sort of danger or threat or ridicule or ostracism or some other damage. And this requires intervention. So sometimes we are angry or we rage on behalf of someone we love or someone close to us or someone under our protection. Environment refers to a situation in which the environment could be home, could be the workplace, could be church, could be the nation state. The environment is facing some sort of danger, some threat, Some attack is under some attack, and this requires mobilization of resources, your resources, and intervention on behalf of the threatened collective or the endangered or environment. Mate refers to a situation where there's a use of rage or a use of anger, either to guard a mate, to prevent access to a mate, or to obtain or secure a mate. Anything to do with mate selection, mating, mate guarding, all these situations might involve, and very frequently does involve, rage. Jealousy is such an example. Jealousy is the name we give to a fear of loss. When we are afraid to lose our mates because they are under some kind of attack. An attack could be a positive thing. For example, when the mate receives a lot of attention, is being courted, flirted with, seduced, and so on. This is perceived as an attack on us because we stand to lose the mate. And so this might trigger aggressive, externalized aggression, which could escalate very easily to violence. Order in society, so we are going through all the 9 triggers, yes? Order in society refers to cases when there is a perceived social injustice, kind of victimhood. And the rage is a response to witnessing this situation, moral injury, or to experiencing this situation, defending one's rights, or trying to restore an erstwhile situation which is perceived as more idyllic than the current situation, make America great again. Resources refers to cases in which violence is used to either obtain resources or prevent the theft of resources, protect resources. Tribe is a historical occurrence. People have always defended their collectives. Collective could be primordial or primitive, like a tribe or a clan, a country, a family, religion, a nation state, a football club, doesn't matter. That's a tribe. And the tribe is under some kind of challenge or threat, and this triggers rage. Rage is a way to channel aggression, to channel violence, like laser focus, and render it more efficacious. And finally, the final trigger is stopped, an act of being frustrated in situations where one feels cornered or impeded from pursuing one's desires and goals. Dollard in 1939 suggested the frustration-aggression hypothesis. He said that frustration often is converted into aggressive impulses and expelled. The aggression is expelled, is externalized. The feeling or restraint that is inherent in such situations, for example, when you are incarcerated, or when you are stopped at the border, not allowed to cross, or when you are prevented from accomplishing something because of the color of your skin, or lack of a legal status. In all these situations, a rage response could occur. Fields believes that for people to control rage responses, they need something accessible, something comprehensive. So he says, if you identify these triggers, if you recognize these situations in everyday lives, it would be easier for you to control your rage, easier for you, more likely to de-escalate. And this is where the problem with narcissism lies. Narcissists are cognitively impaired. They have an impaired reality testing. They don't gauge or evaluate reality appropriately, on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're unable to control their impulses. They're antisocial in this sense. They're a bit psychopathic. And coupled with cognitive distortions, for example, the narcissist inflated, grandiose, fantastic self-image or self-concept, if you put all these together, it's a combustible, explosive mix. And it leads a narcissist to engage in rage much more frequently and for much longer durations than most people. Now, rage, I think we should mention this here. Fields describes or limits himself to classical rage. But rage could be covert. Rage could be inverted. Rage could be passive-aggressive. The covert narcissist rages much more frequently than the overt narcissist, the grandiose narcissist. You see the overt narcissist coming. You see him coming. You see his rage all over the place. He or she is very, very clear, very ostentatious, very visible, very easy to decipher. With the covert narcissist, the rage is internalized, seething in a cauldron of envy and rejection and resentment and hatred and other negative effects. So rage can be externalized or internalized. That's a very important distinction that is rarely made in literature and not made at all in this book. Fields believes that if we were to teach people to identify the triggers of rage, these situations, and their misapprehension of the situation, their misinterpretation of the situation, the people tend to catastrophize. Horrible things are going to happen. I'm under attack. I'm going to lose my life. I'm going to lose my mate. He says if we control these dynamics of catastrophizing and these automatic negative thoughts and so on, and identify these situations clearly, people will be able to take a breather. They'll be able to stop and they'll be able to reflect on why suddenly they feel so rageful. I'm not as optimistic as Douglas feels. I think rage is exactly as he suggests, something to do with primitive zones, primitive regions of the brain, not so much under cognitive control or analytical control. I think very little of it, a small portion of it, has to do with the neocortex or the more advanced areas of the brain, which were added later in evolution. Controlling anger is sometimes a doomed cause, and that's why we have anger management classes. How to control anger? Fields argues that the current approach is to tell people to calm down, suppress this anger, count to 3. But he believes this approach often doesn't work. And he says the cool down, chill method, chilly dude, this method doesn't work because the unconscious mind has already gathered all the information it needs to come to the conclusion that there is a threat and that anger or even rage, aggression, is necessary in order to protect yourself from some kind of perceived threat or damage. It's as if the unconscious mind has filtered out information from the environment, created a scenario, created a narrative, a film, a movie, which says you're going to end badly if you don't act now, and if you don't act decisively, and if you don't act aggressively. And then you act. Emotional responses communicate to our brains that we are in danger. And this corresponds to the 9 triggers that Fields mentions. When we recognize these triggers, we may be able to become cognizant, aware of our emotions. So Fields gave an interview to Scientific American, and he described something that has happened to him. He was with his daughter waiting to board an airplane. So a woman stepped in front of them, jumped the queue. Instead of intervening or having a reactive response, instead of losing it and going apeshit, crazy and angry, his daughter said, "That's one of the triggers. That's the O, order in society." And having realized that, he calmed down and he was not angry at all. So recognizing triggers, Fields is a big believer in recognizing triggers. He argues that because he and his daughter were able to recognize the trigger that made the situation infuriating, they were able to adequately process the behavior of the woman and chill, relax, back off. Recognition of the situation was critical here. He and his daughter were able to reduce their emotional response, regulate it, to engage with the situation as just some kind of annoyance, rather than a situation that is legitimately threatening and requires an aggressive response to put things right, to restore order. And this is one thing with the narcissist. The narcissist is grandiose. The narcissist believes that his life or her life is of cosmic significance. Everything that narcissist does has much wider implications for humanity. He is there to save humanity. Sounds like Elon Musk. For good reason. He is a narcissist, of course. So, when the narcissist comes across someone who violates the social order, breaks the rules, and so on and so forth, it triggers the narcissist, because the narcissist is messianic. The narcissist is the great rescuer, the savior, the healer, the fixer. The pro-social narcissist, ironically, is much more likely to react with indignation and anger and even rage to any violation of what he perceives to be the correct moral order or social order. When we can approach situation from the perspective that this type of neuroscience offers us, we can stop ourselves from snapping. We can engage in behavior that occurs consciously. We can control this behavior because we are conscious. We are aware of what happens. In other words, Field's recipe for the control of rage is to render it conscious rather than unconscious. It emanates, springs forth from the unconscious, but if we are sufficiently educated and self-aware, we can render the whole process conscious, and then we can control it somehow. And all this has to do, according to Fields, with the brain's circuitry, with circuits in the brain. Neural circuits in the brain provoke, according to him, this instantaneous reaction. And when we realize this, when we understand that we are at the mercy of more primitive regions of our brain, we can better gauge which situations warrant rapid responses and which don't. Which situations would benefit from careful thinking before engaging in any action. But even Fields admits that there are definitely circumstances, environments, and people who merit or require warranted rapid responses. In other words, in some situations, anger and rage are justified. So sometimes a more serious response is suitable. And Fields gives an example in his book. He says, you see your child running out into the middle of a street. You run after the child. You pull the child back as a car speeds by. This kind of situation justifies a rapid response without much thinking and analysis. The danger to the child's life is real. I would add to this something that Fields doesn't. It is also justified to be angry at the child and to communicate this anger as a way to inform the child and modify the child's future behavior. And if the child egregiously re-engages in such behavior, even rage and aggression are justified. Impulsive behavior is the key to everything. The same kind of circuitry that allows us to intervene impulsively in an actually threatening situation is the same circuitry that plunges us into inappropriate behavior. In other words, it's a malfunction. Rage is a malfunction of a circuitry that otherwise is much needed because it keeps us alive, it keeps us well, it safeguards and vouchsafes our well-being. But this circuitry can go awry, can become hyperactivated, and this is the case in narcissism. Narcissism is a reaction to abuse and trauma in early childhood. It's a kind of post-traumatic condition. And exactly like in PTSD, in CPTSD, we have many circuits in the brain that go out of whack, out of coordination, out of control. CPTSD is a form of internalized dysregulation. All the circuits of our brain become totally dysregulated. We need to manage our reactions, but sometimes we simply cannot, because we have been conditioned by an environment that kept triggering the same circuits over and over again until the whole thing became habituated. It became a habit to react this way. So breaking snap decisions into the 9 different triggers is a useful intellectual exercise. But I'm not as sure as Fields is, that it's a workable recipe in most situations, and I'm quite sure that it will not work with narcissists. And the more narcissistic we become, all of us, the more narcissistic our civilization is, the less likely this advice is going to work. We each have our own neural mechanisms. We each have a worldview, a model, working model as to how to confront particular threats and how to manage reactions. Some of us back off, some of us confront. It's very idiosyncratic. It's very unique to each and every person. But the narcissist is not a nuanced machine. It's a binary machine, all calm or all rageful. There's almost never anything in between. When the narcissist is angry, in all likelihood, he is imitating anger, or simulating anger, or pretending to be angry for manipulative purposes. These narcissists are actually, ironically again, never angry. They either want to bite your head off, or they don't pay any attention to you whatsoever. You don't exist. There's no middle ground here. So rage in narcissism is simply the malfunction of brain circuitry that has been overexposed to stimuli in a very critical period of life, which is early childhood. When I say abuse and trauma, remember, many things that are not considered abuse and not considered traumatic actually are. When you're overprotective of the child, you isolate the child from reality and from peers, that's abuse. When you spoil and pamper the child, you destroy the child's reality testing, that's abuse. When you parentify the child, when you let the child serve as your own parent rather than the other way around, that's abuse. When you instrumentalize the child, when you offload all your unfulfilled dreams and fantasies and wishes onto the child, that's abuse. All these situations are not adversarial. They don't involve adversity, but they involve trauma because they do not recognize the child's needs. They don't allow the child to separate and individuate, become an individual. They don't let the child become. The child is objectified and in many ways dehumanized, used, exploited, and that's a great definition of abuse. And so, in a dysfunctional family setting, which doesn't have to involve adversity, could involve idolizing and pedestalizing and so on, in a situation where the child's emerging boundaries and nascent self are not allowed to flourish and thrive and to reach maturity and fruition, there the child's development and personal growth are stunted and thwarted. And there, these circuits of the brain are exposed to an avalanche of adverse stimuli or stimuli that threaten the child's independence, the child's existence, the child's agency, the child's ability to act in the world and on the world, the child's self-efficacy. It's all threatened by bad parenting. And so the brain keeps firing and firing the same circuits over and over again. And even when the threat is gone, the parents are no more, the child remains hyperactive in this sense, reacts with extreme catastrophizing and terror and panic and rage to even the tiniest and smallest challenge difficulty, disagreement, or perceived slight, insults, real and imagined, they all trigger this fight or flight response. And in this case, in the case of a narcissist, it's usually a fight response. So this is the source of rage in narcissism. And no recognition of triggers, no self-awareness, no self-consciousness is going to help in this case. It is too hardwired, embedded in the narcissist's brain. The abnormality is there, and usually to stay.